The Indian and the Chinese army are currently in a standoff at multiple points along the India-China border. For a perspective of what the Tibetan government in exile thinks about the current face-off between the Indian and the Chinese armies, which is largely along the India-Tibet border, we are joined live and exclusive on India Today at this time by Dr. Lobsang Sangay, President of the Tibetan administration in exile. Dr. Sangay is a Tibetan scholar. He became Prime Minister of the Tibetan Central Administration, the first monk, non-monk to hold this post. He's been a Fulbright scholar and he is the political successor to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So his words carry weight not just in the Tibetan community but also as a political appointee on this important post. So Dr. Sangay, welcome to India Today. I want to start by
Thank you very much, Rahul.
Understanding from you what you make of the current face-off between the Indian and Chinese armies as it's largely taking place on the India-Tibet border. As the leader of the government in exile, how are you viewing these developments between the two large standing armies of the world?
We have been saying for the last 60 years, what happened to Tibet could happen to you. That's to India and all the neighboring countries of Tibet. Now, clearly, from the border incursions to influences in the neighboring countries, you can clearly see what happened to Tibet is happening now. So since the occupation of Tibet, China is trying to expand its influence to the South Asian region as well. And till you solve the issue of Tibet, this border incursion and all these problems or the tensions will remain.
What are you making of the recent aggression and adventurism we're seeing from the Chinese government, whether it is along the India-Tibet border, whether it is in the South China Sea, whether it is with Taiwan, whether it is with the various other countries in the East Asian region? How are you, as the leader of the Tibetan government in exile, viewing this increasing adventurism and militarism that we're seeing from the Chinese government?
The recent adventurism is part of their expansionist design. And politically, whenever you have some internal tension or problems, you want to distract it by, raising external problems and external challenges. And hence, you can see from South China Sea to Hong Kong to Taiwan and 3,488 kilometers long border between Tibet and India. Having said that, after Tibet was occupied, the Chinese leaders, including Mao Zedong, have said that Tibet is the palm and the five fingers are Ladakh, Sikkim, Nepal, Bhutan, and Arunachal. So they've taken over the palm. Now they're, taking over or penetrating to all these five fingers. So this is what's happening in Ladakh as well. So this is part of their grand old strategy for 60 long years. And the recent tension is they are coming under enormous international pressure, given the Wuhan-originated pandemic. The people, countries are blaming them. WHO included 130 countries signed off to investigate the origin of coronavirus, which obviously it's from city of China called Wuhan.
You spoke about the internal condition in China. You have so many Tibetan people who are still in touch with you and your associates. What is the picture that you're able to draw up about the kind of dynamic that's at play in mainland China, in Tibet at this time, and what could this suggest about the kind of pressure that Xi Jinping and the Chinese government is facing?
When you don't come through a democratic process, which at the moment is a one-party totalitarian system, so there is an element of insecurity and paranoia. Latest that we hear in Tibet, no one is allowed to visit Tibetan monasteries. Nuns and monks, even to venture outside the monastery, they need local permission. If you want to venture outside the state, you need a state-level permission just for travel. So what they are trying to do is absolute control over the Tibetan plateau because they don't want any kind of tension. So this clearly shows you that the Chinese leadership is a bit in a jittery mood. So hence they are clamping down on Tibetans as we speak, even though this month is Sakadawa, which is the holiest month for Tibetan Buddhism. This is just 2 days ago, it was Purnima, and Buddha was born, Buddha died, Buddha attained nirvana in this holy month. And this is the month where monks are allowed to be in the monasteries, allowed to travel. Tibetans are allowed to go to monastic places. But Chinese government is putting so much pressure at this moment. So that shows that, they're a bit nervous as we speak.
Can you give us a sense of what you're hearing about the military build-up along the India-Tibet border? On the one side, you've spoken of how people in Tibet are being denied their basic rights. A lot of videos have emerged in the public domain which seem to be suggesting multiple military maneuvers and a build-up on the Tibetan side of the border. What are you hearing?
I mean, we've been saying this for a long time. When Chinese government promised us to build one road connecting China to Tibet, they promised us prosperity, and stability. But that road was, used to bring trucks, guns, and tanks to occupy Tibet. Since that time, one road has become 100 roads connecting all over Tibetan plateau, including the borders of India. Now, they have built 30 airports, including 6 military airfields neighboring Arunachal and Ladakh and various places in Tibet. And then now we also know that the ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missiles, were stationed in and around Tibetan plateau, So all this military build-up has been, taking place for 60 years. Even the railway line that has connected from China to Lhasa, now coming to Shigatse to the border of Nepal, the railway tracks are of military grade, high military grade, which can bring heavy equipments, and obviously for war towards the border. So the whole of Tibetan plateau is militarized. Hence, His Holiness the Dalai Lama has been saying the permanent solution to this border tension and with all the neighboring countries can be found if Tibet can be made into a zone of peace and the borders be demilitarized, Because as per our history, there was no, forget about military, there was not even a need for police to guard the border of India and Tibet. Now, since it became Indo-China border, all these tensions have come up.
Given what's happening along the India-Tibet border at this time, what do you believe is realistically possible on the political issue of Tibet? A lot of the commentary in China would have us believe that this is an issue that's now long in the past, that a lot of the young Tibetans see the advantage that becoming a part of mainstream China provides to them in terms of prosperity, in terms of jobs, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of modern amenities, which they didn't have when Tibet was an autonomous area. So given the current conflict and the international scenario, what do you believe, Dr. Sangay, is realistically possible on the issue of Tibet?
Colonial power always used some, economic justification to occupy your country. So India was under British rule for 250 years, and all that time they would say, you are better off under us. Similarly, they are using this economic justification, in Tibet as well. But it's baseless. If Chinese government is so confident that Tibetans in Tibet will support them, then let's have a referendum of Tibetans in Tibet. Let them vote and choose a Tibetan leader and Chinese leader. And I can say with absolute certainty, hands down, a Tibetan leader would win. If I was the candidate and if the Xi Jinping or any other Chinese leader is the candidate, I'm pretty sure I would win, not because I'm Lobsang Sangay, but because I'm a Tibetan. Tibetan would like to see the leader to be a Tibetan. So what Chinese government says is not true. And for a fact, 154 Tibetans have committed self-immolation. They have burned themselves, which is to say they are suffering. Their repression is so painful, so unbearable, that Tibetans are saying, I would put kerosene or gasoline over my body and burn myself to protest against the repression of Tibetan people and cultural assimilation of Tibet. So this is what's going on in Tibet as we speak.
Sir, a US lawmaker has moved a bill in the Congress asking for the American president to recognize Tibet as an independent nation. Now, this has been generating international headlines. As the leader of the Tibetan government in exile, what are you making of what's happening in the United States?
Yes, I know there's a resolution supporting the independence of Tibet. And we welcome any kind of support from anybody, because we do need support from everybody. But this is more of a symbolic gesture, and so which it is. And we have also made a representation regarding the definition of Tibet. And he says only Tibet Autonomous Region. Now his office is correcting it to say that they meant Tibet, right? But there is more substantive bill called Tibetan Policy and Support Act of 2019, which was passed in the U.S. House with 392 members supporting it, out of 426 votes, 26 members, which is, 95% of the Congress members have supported the bill. This will, come to the Senate, and if Senate votes, then it will go to President Trump to sign it. So that's a more substantive bill. What it shows is that support for Tibet, no matter what Chinese government says, in the US is very strong, even in the European countries are strong, and Australia and many countries are realizing that we need to learn from